I'm carving into this piece of redbud wood right here and then filling its big old crack full of resin and running a little bit of fire over it because I was doing some baking earlier and kept running into issues with traditional dough rolling tools like my own human forearm, which made me dizzy, my absolute unit of a cat, Sal the cat, which actually worked out okay but left more than the acceptable number of cat hairs in the dough. And I even turned to nature's rolling pin, a piece of tree limb, but that likewise left more than the acceptable number of tree bits in the dough. So to the garage we go to make ourselves a rolling pin.
I have right here 2 different redbud limbs that were sent to me 2 years ago now when I was doing the map of official state trees, the eastern redbud being the official state tree of the state of Oklahoma. I had some really amazing listeners send me some pieces of redbud that were ultimately too small to make Oklahoma out of for that map. Luckily I did have someone send a large enough piece, but as you can see, these are both cracked pretty heavily, which is to be expected anytime you're working with a small limb like this and the pith is intact, the pith being the very center of a log or limb. As the wood dries out, it dries unevenly and cracks. So let me talk you through what I'm thinking. This one is the right length for a rolling pin. This one's a little stubbier than I want. As you all know, when it comes to making things like vases and platters and even bowls, I don't mind some cracking, but if we're making a rolling pin, these cracks are gonna make it impossible for the rolling pin to do its job. So this is a rare example of where I will be turning to some epoxy. First things first though, it will be most beneficial for us to turn these both down to round, just so that we can be more efficient with pouring and molding the epoxy. And then we'll add the epoxy, let that cure, come back here in a day, finish turning it down, we'll be good to go. Let's get to it.
All right, so the more I think about it, the more I feel like this longer one might actually be the only real option here. This huge crack is definitely annoying, but the other piece just feels like it might be too short, so ignore what I said earlier. I'm just gonna turn this one down to round and we'll see how that goes for us. Consider this rolling pin stage 1. I want this to be a pretty thin rolling pin, so my thought is to just get it turned down to slightly thicker than the final shape I'm aiming for, then fill the crack full of resin, wait for it to cure, and toss it back onto the lathe and finish the turning. Once again, this wood is from the eastern redbud, Circus canadensis, a small tree native to much of the eastern US and parts of northern Mexico. It's now found in urbanized areas throughout the world as an ornamental tree, where it's favored for its showy magenta blossoms that appear in clusters from spring to early summer, where they're pollinated by long-tongued bees like blueberry and carpenter bees, since the shorter-tongued species can't quite reach the nectaries. Redbud blossoms are edible and provide an interesting mild floral flavor, so the plan here is to take this redbud wood rolling pin and use it to help us make a redbud flavored dessert later in the video. For now though, this is turned down enough that I'm ready to pour some epoxy, so I've made a very rudimentary mold out of some tin foil and just gonna fill that crack in as best I can. Now, if what you're looking for here is a guide on how to use epoxy, you've come to the wrong place. I barely know what I'm doing. I don't really use this stuff very much. I should definitely get a blowtorch for this step here to help pop those bubbles, since this little lighter isn't really doing the best job. So I don't know, I'm sure I'll get one eventually. Honestly, I don't care. The biggest thing I'm trying to do here is just make sure that this will roll without having a giant crack for dough to get stuck in.
All right, this has been curing overnight. Tinfoil is not the way to go, by the way. Do as I say, not as I do.
All right, here's our resin-encrusted redbud limb. Let's toss it up onto the lathe and get back after it. I'm using a carbide tool here since tear out doesn't really matter. Just got to turn it down through all that outer layer of resin to where we're cutting into all wood plus that little resin crack. At which point it's time to switch to the skew chisel to get some cleaner cuts. And I gotta say, redbud is a really nice wood to work with. It turns quite well, and I'm very eager to see how it all looks with some oil applied, which it's almost time to do now that I've turned it down to a shape that feels about right. So let's sand and then spray down with some water to raise that grain, allowing us to knock it back down and get a smoother finish, which is pretty important for something like a rolling pin, which we're going to be handling and washing quite regularly. And here we are, oil adding time. And just as I suspected, this redbud wood is absolutely gorgeous. I am loving that contrast between the darker heartwood and the pale sapwood. There's some good knots in there, a little cheeky the chatoyancy. And yeah, the resin job on the crack is far from perfect, but you know what? I'll take it. All right, let's give this a quick buff and polish, then part off the ends just using the parting tool most of the way through and then finishing off with some hand sawing. And we're all done. This is neat. I officially certify this to be a neat redbud wood rolling pin. I cannot wait to try it out. Speaking of which, what should we make with it now? Well, this is eating trees, so let's turn, of course, to some eastern redbuds, which are popping off right now, and gather some blossoms, not over-harvesting from any one tree so that we can leave some for the pollinators. And I'll use these to make redbud jelly in an attempt to make a redbud version of a Danish pastry called hindbærsnitter, which you can think of as like a fancy raspberry pop-tart. Bring your blossoms home and remove the stems as they can bring a bitter flavor to the party. Now, this step can be time-consuming, but just do a little meditation or listen to your favorite podcast or just have a good time plucking some stems. Once you're done, measure the amount of destemmed flowers you've got. I was aiming for about 2.5 to 3 cups here and place them in a jar. Then add roughly the same volume of boiling water. This doesn't need to be exact, but obviously the more flowers, the stronger the flavor, the more water, the weaker. Now it's time for a crucial part of this recipe, some citric acid by the way of the juice of half of a lemon. Now this is not only going to punch up the flavor, but perhaps just as importantly, it'll punch up the color of the redbud tea thanks to science. It's so cool. The pH level changes and we go from that dull yellow color to just a vibrant magenta. I love it so much. After letting the tea steep for about 24 hours, it's time to strain, and look at this color. It's only getting better from here. Now let's just take it over the stovetop and bring it to a boil, at which point add a pectin of your choice. I prefer the no sugar needed pectin as opposed to the 1-to-1 because it allows you to sweeten to your preference, but just follow the instructions of the pectin you are using. Once that's mixed in and brought back to a boil, I'm going to add about 1.5 cups of sugar to this 3 cups of tea and see how that works out for us. Then just bring back to a boil and let that boil for a bit. Then pour them into some jars, sanitizing and boiling them if you want long-term storage, but I'll be using these right away, so I'm going to skip that step. And once everything's cooled off, we have just an absolutely gorgeous jar of redbud jelly on our hands. Here I am tasting it and giving my thoughts to a microphone that I hadn't realized was broken, so that was kind of fun, but the verdict is that I really love it. The floral taste is really quite subtle. It's not overpowering at all. The lemon juice gives a nice tart flavor, but it doesn't taste like lemons. There's almost like a tart grape flavor that it brings out. It's hard to put your finger on what the flavor is here, but it's absolutely delicious. Now let's move on to the dough. Using a modified hindbærsnitter recipe from Scandinavian from Scratch by Nicole Asatola, into a food processor goes 1 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, 1.5 cups cake flour, 1 cup powdered sugar, and a half teaspoon of kosher salt. Pulse that all together until combined. Then add 1 cup of cold sliced butter and pulse that together till it forms a coarse sand-like texture. Then add 1 egg, pulse that to combine, and add a teaspoon of vanilla extract and pulse that until it combines into a single clump. Then divide the dough into equal halves and wrap and refrigerate those for 30 minutes up to overnight. Now that they're all ready, it's time to put our redbud wood rolling pin to the test, rolling each piece of dough out on a piece of parchment paper until it's roughly a 9 by 9 inch square. And I am thrilled to report that the rolling pin worked like a charm, somehow even better than Sal the cat. Don't tell him I said that though. Once both pieces are rolled out to sides, place them on a baking sheet and prick them all over with a fork to prevent puffing in the oven. Which is where they're going to go now, to bake for 15 minutes at 350 degrees with racks in the upper and lower thirds and rotating the trays halfway through, removing when the edges have just begun to brown. I squared off the edges with a knife as soon as I pulled the slabs out of the oven while the cookies were still soft, and then let them cool completely before flipping one of them over and covering with a jar of our precious redbud jelly. I know I keep saying it, but I mean, just look at that magenta color. I can't get enough of it. Once you've got a good thick spread, gently place the other sheet on top, and now it's time to make some icing. For this, I made another redbud tea, this time more heavily concentrated with lemon juice, using just a very small amount of boiling water and the juice of half of a lemon, along with about 1/2 cup of blossoms. Add some of that to a cup of powdered sugar. I already added a bit too much liquid, so I'm just going to keep adding powdered sugar until the consistency is just right. Then just spread it across the top sheet. And as a finishing touch, I plucked only the petals from some more red buds to sprinkle across across the top while the icing is still wet. And look at this thing. I gotta admit, I'm pretty proud of how this has all come together. Once the icing is set, now it's time to just cut it into some squares, and there we have it, some redbud snittar, aka fancy redbud pop-tarts, aka another harebrained eating trees scheme. The only thing left to do now is give them a taste.
Oh, that is... Honestly, that is just as delicious to eat as it is messy. Oh, these are like right in the way, aren't they? Okay. That redbud jelly is just dynamite. A light floral note, not overpowering at all. Some definite fruity flavors in there. We did it. I'm gonna call this mostly successful. Try something out like this at home. Definitely make the redbud jelly. If you have an execution on a redbud jelly-based dessert, let me know in the comments. Give it a try. Tell me if you have success. I wanna see you all make a springtime dessert, the likes of which we've never seen before. And that's it for this episode of Eating Trees. I'd say we successfully springtimeified a tree cookie and made a nice little rolling pin here to boot. Up next, as chosen in a poll by my Patreon backers, we're gonna be returning finally to the US Map Volume 2. But since it was a pretty close race between going on the road and returning to the map, maybe I should combine the two. Come back soon. Let's find out together. Springy. All right, this is a mess.